Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Alice Avrutin-Yellin, and I am a storyteller. Before I start, I'd like just to ask if anybody, besides the young man in the back row, has read Letters from Rifka. All right, good. Okay. So I have some people who know what it's about. Let me tell you how this book came to be and how I got involved in storytelling. I have a cousin whose name is Karen Hesse, my second cousin. And Karen is a rather well-known children's writer. She's won the Newbery Award for one of her books called Out of the Dust, which is excellent if no one here has read it, and a half a dozen children's historical fiction pieces. In 1991, 92, Karen decided she wanted to write a book about her own family. Her side of the family had lived in Baltimore, and she lived in Vermont. So she went down to Baltimore to talk to her aunts and uncles and cousins who would have stories about the trip from Europe. Her grandfather was already passed away, so there really wasn't as many stories as she wanted. So someone suggested that she go and visit Aunt Lucy, who became Rifka. Lucy is my mother, who lived in Gillette at the time. So Karen came down from Vermont with an old-fashioned tape recorder, moved in with my mother, and had her tell all her stories. They were my bedtime stories growing up. And Karen said thank you and left. A year or two later, she sent us the first copy of the book, along with a box of chocolate-covered cherries, which are my mother's favorite candy. My mom read the book and threw the cherries in the garbage. She was so angry with Karen because Karen, my mother, did not look like this. Okay. Secondly, she changed everybody's name. She changed all the ages. She changed a lot. And my mom said, that's not my family. That's not my story. I'm never talking to her again. It's true. But she still sent chocolate-covered cherries every year. She broke down and ate them. Okay. So that was that for a while. 1996, a friend of mine calls me on the telephone and says, Alice, do you know they're reading the book about your mother in Summit in the third grade? My son's in there. And I went, oh, how nice. Da-da-da-da. She says, I told the teacher. She's going to call you. I went, okay. So Mrs. Smith, third grade, I don't remember which of the 3 elementary schools in Summit it was anymore, called me and said, oh my God, the kids love the book. They want to meet your mother. Would it be possible? And I said, sure. Asked Mom. Mom said, yeah, if you come with me. I said, I'll be happy to come with you. At this point, my mother was in her early 80s, a little more. And a week before we were going into Summit, a tree on Mountain Avenue jumped right in front of my mother's car. And she ended up with 2 broken ankles and a broken shoulder and was taken to Morristown Memorial. She was fine. You had to back up and run my mother over with a truck. She was 98 when she finally went. And she died of old age, nothing more. So I called Mrs. Smith and said, I'm so sorry. There's no way. And Mrs. Smith said, oh, the children will be so disappointed. Can you come? I said, well, I'm not the author. I'm not the character in the book. But I have all the pictures. If you like, I'll come. So I went. It was a hit. The following year, I did it for the whole third grade. The year after that, I did it for the whole school in the auditorium. And ever since then, I travel to whoever wants me and whoever has been reading Letters from Rifka. Have you read this? Yeah, you're about the right age. Okay. So, what I'm going to do now is demonstrate what I do when I come into a classroom. Is everybody ready? Yeah. I am going to cast a spell. There's no talking. There's no wiggling. There's no raising your hand because you want to go to the bathroom. No interruptions. Questions at the end. If you can follow these simple rules, I will make magic. Now, when I'm doing this for 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I get, and it's quiet. And so I start with a fairy tale. Once upon a time, in a place that was a real place and a time that was a real time, there lived a little girl named Rifka and her cousin Fishel. And it was a magical place, Berditchev, because on the 2nd day of school, every year, it would begin to snow. And it would snow and snow and snow until it reached the rooftops. And the children loved it because they had 3 miles to walk to school and 3 miles back, except at the very coldest part of the winter when the river froze and they could take a shortcut. Now, the reason the kids loved this long walk was that they had backpacks, so their hands were free to throw snowballs, to make snowmen, to fall down and do snow angels, igloos, anything you can imagine. Rifka had a beautiful leather backpack that her 2 older brothers had worked in the apple orchard the summer before and had bought her a leather backpack. Fishel, on the other hand, her poor cousin, did not have any money. And that's Fishel up there. So he couldn't play like the other children. He had to carry his books and his pencils and his paper in his arms. He got really, really frustrated. So one day, he stole a ruble from his father's nightstand. Now, a ruble is a Russian coin, still today, about the size of a silver dollar. And it was worth a bit of money, but it wasn't a fortune. But Fishel didn't know that. He took the ruble to the general store, held it up to the man behind the counter, and said, "Sir, is this enough for a backpack?" And the guy behind the counter was a ganef, a thief, and said, "Sure, kid," and pushed a package across the counter at Fishel. Fishel opened it up. It looked like a backpack. It had straps and buckles. It was a backpack. He grabbed it and ran. And Rifka, who was there with him, was going, "He's cheating you, you're not. No, he went off with it. He got home, stuck it under his bed, and went to sleep. The next morning, he got up before anybody else, crept out of his bed, took the backpack, put his book, his pencils, his rulers, everything in there, strapped it onto his shoulders, and tiptoed out the door. He didn't get 4 feet from the front door when it began to rain. The backpack was made out of paper, and it fell apart right there with the book and the pencil and everything laying in the snow. Fishel sadly tried to gather it all up together, and he went home. And his father beat him for stealing the ruble. Now, I have a lot of other stories about Fishel, who was always getting into trouble. But if we have time, I'll get into some more of those then. And let's go on to the next slide. That's Fishel's mother, Aunt Anna, who's a terrible picture. Truly, because my mom always said that she was gorgeous and had long, long blonde hair down below her waist, that her treat was to be able to comb and brush Aunt Anna's hair. And she was also a seamstress and could do magic. There's a lot of magic in my stories. Magic with a very small piece of cloth. Next, thank you. Now, For those of you who've read Letters from Rifka, it's known, Karen made it into an epistolary novel, which means it's a series of letters. Now, and the person that whom the letters were going to is this young lady, Tovah. In reality, there were no letters. This is one of Karen's, I'm having fun with this stuff. Tovah was the daughter of the rich cousin. My grandfather had a cousin who had gone to school in England for engineering. And when he came back to Berdichev, they were protected because he was the only one who knew how to make the lights in City Hall go on and off. So whenever there was a pogrom, they would send him and his family out of the city and to safety in Moscow. My mother, her parents, and the next two brothers ended up hiding in the cellar of their dacha, which was like a summer house right outside of Berdichev. And the caretaker would roll potatoes through the open window so they'd have something to eat. And it's appropriate. Easter is this coming week, and that was the worst time of year for pogroms. The Roman Catholic, not the Greek Orthodox priests in all the churches would get up in the pulpit and go, kill the Jews. He killed Christ, they killed Christ, let's kill the Jews. And that's all it took. The Cossacks came through town and part of the army, and they had no control. My grandfather was standing in front of the house, tall, handsome guy with a pair of good boots that somehow he had had enough money to buy. And one of the Cossacks said, I want those boots. My grandfather said, no. The guy took his bullwhip and started beating my grandfather to try to make him take off his boots. My mother saw what was going on. She ran at this guy, tried to get away from my father. He slugged her, and she went running across the ground. Luckily, somebody else came by and said, the officers are coming. So they stopped what they were doing, they collected whatever booty they had, and left. And my grandfather kept his boots. This was the reason that people wanted out. There were major pogroms in 1905. My Mima Sira, who was my grandmother's aunt, Grandma Sarah, who was a really smart cookie. She never learned how to read or write, but she had a head for numbers. And she made her living being a card shark because she had all the numbers memorized. She also could read the writing on the wall, even though she couldn't read. And she saved up enough money to send her children to America, and then my mother's oldest three brothers. There were 6 of them all together. My mom was the youngest and the only girl. Then the war started in 1914. Nobody was going anywhere. And they tried to survive. And things were really awful. Then, in 1917, towards the end, the Germans marched into Berdichev, which, if I didn't mention it before, is about 50 miles south of Kiev in modern-day Ukraine. The army came in, the German army, and this is not the Nazis, this is the First World War, and they were much more tolerant than the local Russians and the peasants and the Ukrainians. So they opened an airfield outside of town. They bought and paid for everything they took, which was amazing. And there was one big, fat German aviator. Now, that's just Snoopy, because I think it's funny. He's the World War I flying ace, and that's actually the real Red Baron. Curse you, right? You know. There was this one German aviator among the group. He was, according to my mom, he was this big, fat guy, how he could even waddle. And he had the leather helmet and a white silk scarf and jodhpurs and boots, just like the absolute caricature that you might imagine. And he took a liking to my mother. She was all of 4 or 5 at the time. She was blonde with green eyes, and he had a picture in his wallet of his daughter back in Germany who looked very similar to her. So he adopted her. He let her follow him around all over, through the town, the airfield, and he would buy candy from my grandmother, who had a little store in the front of the house, and give it to my mother. Well, one day, excuse me, oh, he took her out to the airfield, picked her up, and put her in the front seat of the plane, a biplane, right next to or behind the machine gun, and went out and started the propeller. Mom didn't know what was going on. Jumped out of the plane, terrified, landed in the mud, and started running back home. And the guy went chasing after her, going, bitte, 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 Kinder, nicht, nicht, nicht. No, come and see, come and see. All the way through the town, through my grandmother's store with my grandma going, wah, and through the front, into the bedroom, and my mother under the bed. He catches up. You know, Lucia, which was her name in Russian, please, come, bitte, 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 come out, come. No, he goes out to the store part, buys, I always imagine it was a licorice stick from my grandma, and goes back in and goes like this. Come on out. She wouldn't come out. From that time until the time the German army pulled out, she ran away whenever she saw him. And she didn't take an airplane ride until I was 13. So I think definite fear of planes. Okay, next. Okay, we're going to talk about what happened next. After the war was finally over, 1918, the Bolsheviks had come into power. Things changed. Some things were better, some things were worse, mostly worse. But one of the good things that did happen is that the Soviets insisted that everybody could go to school. Everybody had to go to school. Before then, if a Jewish child wished to go to school, their parents had to pay for 2 Gentile children to go as well. Many people couldn't afford that. But come the revolution, as my mother used to say, everybody went to school. And all the kids were jammed into like a one-room schoolhouse, kindergarten through 3rd grade. And my mom and Fischl went off to school together. In those days, you had to memorize page upon page of poetry and recite it the next day. Rifka was a really good student with a really good memory. She never had any problem. Fischl, on the other hand, probably didn't even try. So there they are. Picture this, please. There's a desk with 3 students on one desk, and they're all trying to do their particular assignment. And it's Fischl's turn to stand up and read, or rather recite his poetry. And my mother is sitting next to him with the book open on her lap, going, pss, 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 pss. Of course, the teacher was coming by, and I always had this tall, skinny lady with a cinched-in waist and a hair in a bun, and she comes over to the 2 of them and goes, yank! Smacks both of them on their hands with her ruler. My mother had to sit under her desk for the rest of the day, and Fischl had a dunce cap and had to sit on a stool in the corner. So this was life. And meanwhile, my uncle Nathan, who was my mother's next oldest brother, got drafted. He was 15 to get into the Russian army. That was a death sentence for Jewish kids. They weren't going to come back. So they had papers drawn up. There had been a treaty signed between Russia and Poland that people who had been born in Poland and were now living in Russia could go back and vice versa. And my grandfather held up his hand and said, I was born in Poland. So they managed to get the paperwork, to get the 4 of them at that point, 5 of them, excuse me. My grandfather, my grandma, my mother, Paul, and Nathan out, except Nathan had been taken away. And he was in a camp undergoing basic training luckily no more than 30 miles from Berdichev. They got word to him somehow that we can get out. So he climbed over the fence and ran. He made it back to Berdichev, to the train station. Okay. Okay, the train station in Berdichev. My uncle hid in a load of hay in one of the cattle cars. The soldiers were going up and down the platform with drawn bayonets, looking for deserters. Everybody got pushed through. My mom said she remembered to the day she died, sitting on the train steps, waving her legs. She was 8 years old, and watching them go up and down, praying, "Dear God, I'll be good. I won't fight with my brother Paul. I'll listen to my father. Just don't let them find my brother." A miracle. They didn't stick the bayonet in that load of hay. Train whistle blew, and the train pulled out of Berdichev on its way, eventually, to America. My mom didn't find out till much later that my grandparents had sold whatever was left of value. Silver candlesticks, my grandma's pendant, anything, and they bribed the soldiers not to stick the bayonet in that particular load of hay. Okay. Off they went. They had to stop in Matziv, which I think we have on the map there, Bruce. Can you? Okay. Matziv was a little town on the Russian-Polish border. People had to get off and be checked before you could get on your next step. And it was also filthy. Fleas, vermin of all kinds. And everybody came down with typhus, which is a particularly nasty disease. High fever, among many, many other things. Lots of people died of typhus. Everybody in the family got it except Paul. Paul never got anything. He was amazing. And there they were, stuck. Little by little, they recovered, mostly because Paul was able to get a job and get some food and money for them. Meanwhile, money was piling up in Warsaw from the older boys who had gotten out before 1914. So you had to get to Warsaw to get the money. And after a couple of weeks in Matziv, my grandma dragged herself up, borrowed a sheitel. Does everybody know what a sheitel is? It's a wig that the Orthodox Jewish women wear. Okay. Borrowed a sheitel from someone and took herself by train to Warsaw. Went to the bank and got a couple $100 worth out, in zlotys probably in Polish money, and came back to Matziv and then asked the doctors, how much is it going to cost to let us out? And they told her a price, and off they went. Then they were in Warsaw with a similar situation. Again, they had to be bribed to let them go on their next part of the voyage. At that point, they split up. My grandfather and the two boys took the train to Hamburg and got a boat to America. My mother and my grandmother traveled on to Antwerp, which was the major port of Belgium at the time. The Hayas, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which helped Jewish immigrants get out of Europe, and is still in existence, helped them out. Mom says she remembers going for English classes, and they would show them Tom Mix movies, for those of you who are not old enough to know who Tom Mix was. He was a cowboy star with his horse Tony. And Mom said you had to learn to read the titles really fast, otherwise you wouldn't know what was going on in English. She spoke German, Yiddish, Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, and after a year in Antwerp, she spoke Walloon and learned how to juggle, because the kids in Antwerp juggled oranges. So they're waiting for her to get a good report card, and they can go. Meanwhile, she was being taken care of by the nuns, just like the ones from the Flying Nun with the enormous headdresses. That's within that order wore those hats. And there was one young nun who was absolutely delightful. I don't know whether she spoke German, because my mom couldn't speak French. And they became very fond of each other. When they finally were going to leave, my grandma gave my mom some money and said, go tip the nun. So my mom went to the convent and offered her the money, and the sister said, no, I can't take any money, we don't do that, we have everything we need. So my mom, who never could hear no, went out to the flower market, most magnificent place, and bought an enormous quantity of gladioli, bigger than she was, and brought them to the sister. And of course, it started to rain the minute she bought the flowers. She got to the convent dripping wet. The flowers are dripping wet. Knocked on the door of the cell. The nun opened it up and said, oh my God, pulled her in, took the flowers, dried her off, put one of her extra habits on my mother to dry her off, and looking at her going, and my mom, She says, I told you I need nothing. And she opened up the back door of her cell, which led into the garden. And there were gladioli like you couldn't possibly imagine. And then they left for America. Do we got the Gothenburg up there? Okay. Passports. Okay, that's my grandfather. That's Grandpa Shimon. My Uncle Nathan, he's the one who went AWOL over the fence. I have pictures of Paul later on. And that is the Gotland, which is the boat they took from Antwerp. It was a fairly small boat. My grandma wanted to wait until they could get on a boat that didn't have steerage. One class, everybody on it. And it was fine until they got close to New York Harbor. And a storm came up of biblical proportion. There was a piano in the stateroom, whatever you want to call it, that was nailed to the floor. The storm was so strong that it was ripped out of the nails and was going back and forth across the floor. They all thought they were going to drown, go right down. And it was Rosh Hashanah. And somebody blew a ram's horn. And the story is that the storm stopped. Now, it's a nice story, so we'll go with the storm stopping for that reason. Next morning, my mom goes up on deck. All of the railings are gone, totally gone. And there's a poor sailor wrapped up in bandages sitting on a deck chair. They had to be pulled by a tugboat into Manhattan Harbor. And my mom saw the Statue of Liberty for the first time. And then they deposited her in Ellis Island. Now that's from the Ellis Island Society. If you have family who came over, you can make a contribution and they'll give you this stuff. And it tells all about my mom. Now the next one is the actual manifest from the Gotland. And we've got circled my mom. That's her on it. And next to her is her mother, Etta, was Ethel. And this was very confusing to all of us because it doesn't say Lucia, it doesn't say Lucille, it certainly didn't say Rifka, that was Karen's idea. And we know, who is this? It had to be. And I mentioned this to my mother. She was in her 90s at that point. And I said, Mom, who was Susia? And my mom started to cry. It turned out that Susia was her father's pet name for her. Instead of Lucia, it was Susia. So, and they made it, as I said. Now, once they got to Ellis Island, there was confusion. They got separated. My grandma went one way, and they took my mother another way, and they effectively lost her for 3 days on Ellis Island. Nobody knew where she was. They were trying to find her. But she was an excruciatingly self-reliant little girl. At this point, she was 9. She celebrated her 10th birthday in the United States. In Ellis Island, they had these enormous tables filled with food. You had to use your elbows to be able to get a plate. And my mom wasn't shy. She had 5 older brothers. She knew how to do this. But there was a little boy, maybe 5 years old, who didn't speak anything but Russian, and he too was separated from his parents. And he grabbed hold of my mother, and she fed him, and he kept following her all over the place. So they went out of the buildings and where there was construction going on. And there was a porta potty. In the porta potty, where he went in to check it out, he saw the toilet paper. It's marvelous. And he's playing with the toilet paper. And my mother sees him and is yelling at him, no, 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 it's precious. Don't do that. It's paper. It's worth a lot of money. No, no, no. And he's laughing and he's throwing the toilet paper. And some of the construction workers who heard this noise, and it was going on in Russian and Yiddish and German or whatever else it was, got irritated, took the toilet paper and threw it into the bay. All silence. Mom, the little boy, run! Before the police come and arrest us. The next day they located her. We don't know what happened to the little boy. No idea whether he was sent back or whether somebody came and found him. Off the gangplank into America. And there stands my Uncle Paul, the next older brother, the trickster, the one who gave me Schlivovitz when I was 12 years old so I would stop winning at poker. And he was waiting for his sister to arrive because they had done this to him a year before. You handed an immigrant from Eastern Europe a banana and said, here. They wanted to see what you would do. Paul was always hungry, so he ate it with the skin. They laughed at him, they tortured him. Oh, greenhorn, greenhorn, how stupid are you? You don't know enough to peel a banana? Well, Paul was waiting for revenge. His sister was coming, he's gonna do it to her, and then they won't laugh at him anymore. So, there he is, a dime in one hand and a banana in the other. Here, welcome to America. My mom says, thank you, Paul. Puts the dime in her pocket, takes the banana, peels it, and eats it. And everybody laughed at him all over again. Ha ha, even your little sister is smarter than you are. So we never heard the end of that story, So anyway, time?
No, keep going.
I'm just going to make sure I have time for questions. Okay, and there Paul and Nathan, the trickster, and the next older one who was the AWOL. Those are the 2 younger brothers. The older ones I do have pictures of, but they're not really part of this story. And there is Rifka at 13, we think. None of these were dated, when she graduated from junior high school. She couldn't go to high school because she had to go to work. This was 1928, 29. There was no money. My grandparents never learned to speak English. One of her brothers worked at night. Uncle Nathan became a taxi cab driver, and Paul became a baker. And some of her friends, and that was at a Y camp for young immigrant girls. They sent them up to the Catskills for a week. And the favorite story is the food there was disgusting. That they had lumpy oatmeal for breakfast and, whatever. It was awful. So somebody sent my mother a slice of salami in an envelope. And when it got delivered, the grease was coming through and everybody could smell it. It's a good thing she could climb a tree because they were all after her slice of salami. Now, when she did get to the States, she was put in school. In those days, there was no English as a second language. If you didn't speak, they threw you in first grade. As you improved, they would promote you. So there was my mom, who was going on 10 in first grade. Now, she was never very tall to begin with. Like 5 foot, if you stood, she stood really tall. But still, she was taller than the rest of those kids. And she sat in the back of the classroom and could do math. And the teachers were lovely. They would stay after school with all of the immigrant children, of which there were many, and try to help them learn English. And remember, her alphabets were all Cyrillic. So she had to learn a new alphabet as well as a new language. And she's getting there slowly. Now, one day, there was a substitute. Now, I have been a substitute teacher for 30-something years. And it doesn't matter whether it was 1926 or 25 or whether it was 1995. Kids were going to try to see how far they can push you. Doesn't change. So this teacher didn't have any names. So she's going, just like I would do, hey, you with the glasses, come to the board. You with the red sweater, do this. Okay, and then she gets to my mom, who's sitting in the back with her nose in a book trying to read it. Little girl in the back, come up to the board and do this. Mom didn't know she was being addressed. The giggles begin in the classroom. Teacher knows something's going on. Doesn't know exactly what, but something's going on. So she calls again, you, in the back. Nothing. Louder laughter. She goes over and stands next to my sister, next to my mother, and goes, get up, I'm talking to you. Mom looks at her and goes, woman went out and went smack across my mother's face. My mother stood up and went right between the eyes. Teacher fell on her back, legs and arms waving in the air, going, go to the principal's office, go to the principal's office. My mom sits down. So finally, somebody in the classroom took pity and said, ha ha, she doesn't speak English yet. So they took her to the principal's office. The principal says, why did you hit the substitute? Mom looks, oh, okay. He opens the door, sticks my mother out by her head like this, and goes, who understands this one? Teachers' heads pop out all over. And one goes, oh, I understand her. Okay, in she comes. And the question was, okay, Lucy, why did you hit the substitute? My mom says, she hit me first. The principal says, we don't hit teachers in America, Lucy. Mom says, if she hits me, I'm gonna hit her back. And the principal said, all right, go back to the classroom. And the teacher didn't go near her for the rest of the day. So when I used to first tell that story to the kids in middle school, they all used to say, oh my goodness, how could a teacher hit a student? You know, like I used to feel the same way as a kid, right? How could dare that woman hit my mother, right? And you know, after 30 years of subbing, I can understand that woman's attitude. Not that I ever hit anybody, but you know. So, all right. What else did I want to do? I'm losing track. Okay, I think I'm going to stop now. What time, do we have time?
We have 3:40.
Oh, perfect. All right, lights. And I want, please, anybody, one last little thing. If anybody has, or everybody has parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, sit them down and make them tell you their stories. They are the most important thing you can possibly imagine. My mother's been gone since 2009. She lived to be almost 2 days short of her 98th birthday. I still miss her, but I have her stories. Okay, now I will ask for questions. Thank you. You know, there's got to be a question in the place somewhere.
Yeah.
Please.
What town did they go to, your grandmother, when they came out of Ellis Island? Where did they go?
Oh, they went to Astoria, Queens originally, which is where one of her older brothers who had gotten to the America before lived. And then they moved to Brooklyn. So I was born in Brooklyn. So that's many years later, obviously. Anything else? The people who have read the book, the people...
Fisher was a troublemaker.
to say the least.
I know there's some ink stories.
Oh, this is my husband Bruce, who was running the technical side here. And his favorite story is Fischl and the Barrel of Ink. So, okay. You know? In school in Russia, as I said, all the kids got to go to school, but there was no money. So the teachers made ink from ashes and water and whatever else they could get their hands on. And they kept it in barrels. outside the classrooms, so that when you needed ink, you would go out with a scoop and put it in the inkwell on the desks. How many of you remember inkwells in the old wooden desks, right? There you go. So, and the kids would use fountain pens. There was nothing else in that except pencils. And they would dip and write, dip and write. Fischel, very curious child, saw the barrel by the classroom, decided to see what was in it. It was taller than he was. So he climbed up the barrel using the staves, stuck his head in, and said, ink, and promptly fell into the barrel. With his head in there, his legs in the air, kicking and screaming, glug, 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 glug. And luckily, somebody came by and pulled him out, or he would have drowned. And there he was with the ink pouring down his body. There was ink in his ears, and ink in his nose, and ink in his mouth, and ink in his underwear. There was ink everywhere. And of course, there were no changes of clothing at the school. Lucky they had anything. And he went home, and he got beaten again for ruining his clothes. He's got beaten a lot, Fischel. Yeah.
Did he ever make it to America?
No. It's sort of interesting. After the Second World War, my parents and I tried desperately to find out what had happened to my mother's family. Fischel might have been drafted before the war. He was the right age. He might have survived in the Russian army, or more likely he didn't. I'm reading a book at the moment called Motherland, which I highly recommend. It's about women in the Soviet Union from the days of the revolution until the 1970s. It's fascinating, all about the Bolsheviks and what the changes, etc. And they were talking about, during the war, it's called the Home Front, that chapter. And I'm listening to this the other day, and what comes up, the narrator, but mention of Berdichev, which is the town my mother lived in. And I had sort of vaguely known that there had been, I always assumed that the people there died at Baba Yar in Kiev, which is where they rounded up all the Jews and shot them into the gully. And it turned out that Berdichev had its own Baba Yar, where they rounded up all the people of the town and shot them, women, children. The older men had gone off to fight, so they killed everybody. And I assume that if any of them were left, they died at that point. I don't know, we were never able to find out. And it's kind of sad, to say the least. Not, there had to have been 15 or 20 cousins, all gone. Any other questions? The people who read the book, besides my son, because you probably know the answer. Anyone else who read the book? The differences that I noted, it is a good book, despite what my mother thought. It's really a very good book. If you didn't know what really happened, it's an excellent book. Karen took the mention of the sailor who had been wrapped up in bandages on the deck of the ship and made him my mother's love interest in this story. She was, as I said, she wasn't even 10 yet, and so there's things like that which really irritated her, to say the least. But there's other things. Some of it is true, some of it isn't, but it's still a worthwhile read, and it gives you a chance to think about and maybe follow up on more stories. Anybody else? Okay, Stephen, go ahead.
I actually don't know the answer to this question.
Oh, okay.
Nana told you many wonderful stories.
Right.
And of course, you've shared many of them with me and my brother and others, and through the years, many kids and families. Is there a story you wish Nana had written down that either isn't in Letters from Rifka? Is there a particular story that Nana told you that you feel like, I wish I had that written down so I...
No, it was always oral. It was oral history, oral stories. Karen took the stories and made it into this novel. And so people read the book and go, oh, I want to meet Rifka, and are very surprised when that's Rifka, right? Yeah. Yes?
What happened to the tapes?
Say that again?
What happened to the tapes that she was recording? recorded.
The tapes.
Oh.
Karen's tapes.
Oh,
Probably still has it.
which tapes?
Karen.
Oh, Karen. I don't know. She probably does. I haven't spoken to her for a while. Since she got famous, she doesn't talk to us.
Did you ever listen to them?
No, I never heard those. As I said, she came, she left, and then 2 years later, whatever it was, there was the book and the chocolate-covered cherries. Now, she wanted to actually write a book about my father, and she wanted my mother to help her with that. And Mom said, no, because you screwed mine up. I'm not letting you screw up my husband's. Because my dad also had a very interesting life, which is subject of another conversation sometime. I saw a hand, yes.
Oh, yeah, I had wanted to ask the same thing about the tapes.
Ah.
Because if you could get your hands on those, that's your mom speaking.
Oh, I know. Interestingly enough,
I can't imagine that just someone would keep them.
we have her telling some of the stories, which we only found recently. My husband started a project of taking all our old VHS tapes and turning them into DVDs or right onto the computer. And from 1986, the summer, it was my older son's Pina Ben. If no one knows, that's a celebration of buying your firstborn back from the temple. Now it's just an occasion for a party. You know, it's like $10 to charity and let's party, and that's what you do. So we were doing that. The whole family had shown up at my sister's house, who also lived in Berkeley Heights, and I'm on the floor with my 2-month-old baby, and my mom comes and sits down next to me on the floor. And I realized Mom was 75 at that point, with her little schmata on her head, without any problem can sit on the floor. And I'm looking at her going, I'm 75 now. I have trouble doing that. That is impressive. And there she was, and I handed her David and said, Mom, tell me a story. She goes, what do you want? I said, tell me a story. And she started telling me about the banana. And who's sitting at the couch over there is Paul. And he immediately jumps in and says, that's not how I remember it, you know. And so I do have her speaking these things. I wish I had more. But down to the people in Baltimore are all gone, all the cousins. And my mom, because she was the youngest by 20 years of her eldest brother, he was the one who lived in Baltimore, and I'm the youngest as well. So the age gap, I always grew up being the youngest one in the family. And now I'm the matriarch, which is so strange. I was always the kinder, the little girl, you know, and now I'm the matriarch. Any other questions? Something I can tell? Yes?
You said she left high school to go work. What did she do?
Well, she did a whole bunch of things. This was, at this point, it was the beginning of the Depression, and there were no jobs. So she was wandering around Lower Manhattan looking for something, and she saw a sign in a window going, help wanted girl, handy with a needle. She says, I can sew. And she went in and they hired her. Now, she started off doing like routine cleaning jobs, moving fabrics, this, that, and the other. And then there was a small fire. And the next day she comes in to work and the boss hands her a watering can and says, go water all the fabric, so he could put in an insurance claim. Mom said, I'm leaving. Gone. She eventually became a milliner. She was the best hat maker. She could take a piece of fabric and turn it into a hat that you'd be proud to wear. As a matter of fact, for years, whenever I brought a hat home, she'd take it apart and say, this is garbage. You know, and I was so frustrated. And finally, I think once, oh my God, I was at Bonwit Tellers. Anybody remember Bonwit Tellers? And I bought the most magnificent red lacquered straw hat with a red grain ribbon around the middle. And I brought it home, and Mom said, that's a good one. You know, and I kept that until it fell apart. You know, but hard to live up to some of her things. And she loved the opera. When she was a young woman, she would go to the Metropolitan Opera standing room in the back after standing on her feet all day at her job and stand and listen to the opera. And she said if you were lucky, somebody would go out to intermission and let you sit in their seat for the intermission. And she taught me. But a woman who never had much formal education, self-taught, knew opera, knew music, knew art. She and I traveled to Europe together a number of times. My father and I, and she went to Antwerp. We went back to see it after all those years. And hardly anything was left because the Germans were there in the Second World War and bombed it down to the ground. There used to be bridges in Antwerp that lowered instead of rose to let the ships go by on the canals. There were big, furry dogs that used to pull ice cream carts, and all the kids would chase it to get ice cream. The kids would get beer and chocolate for breakfast. That's what they, back in then. So great stories about Antwerp. The flower market had been moved out of town. Mom found an elderly gentleman sitting on a park bench and got into a conversation with him. And he too remembered the dogs and the bridges and the flower market. But it was all gone. So, yeah. And yes?
Picture before this that you just took away for her wedding gown.
Oh, yeah.
Did she sew well?
No. Her wedding gown was rented. They didn't have any money. And the shoes were too big. But that's what came with it. Anyway, it was a beautiful bouquet. She always loved flowers. She had 10 green thumbs, my mother. She could grow anything. And people used to come to our house when we lived out in East Meadow on Long Island to look at her garden. And the joke was we moved every time she ran out of planting space. So we had to get something with a bigger piece of property. Of course. That was always a favorite thing. And my father always brought her gladiola at the anniversary. So, to the right. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Are there any family traditions that were brought from their original village that you still celebrate today?
Well,
Because I assume they couldn't bring things.
no, they brought nothing, effectively. And things got collected. I have a couple of pieces of china that were my grandmother's that are chipped, but I don't have the heart to get rid of them. And I guess to make up for not having anything growing up, my mother used to collect beautiful things. She had a full set of china, of crystal, of silver, and she loved Wedgwood. Most of that stuff is either in my house now or a few pieces are in Houston, Texas, where my sister and her family ended up living about 15 years ago. As a matter of fact, my mother ended up in Houston, of all things, after all of that, because it was just me and my sister here in New Jersey, and Sheila moved, and her husband moved to Houston, where her children were living then. She was tired of not seeing her grandchildren all the time, so they moved. And I said to my sister, look, I love you, I love Mom. I said, but you are fixing it so that I never can go anywhere ever again, because my mom was in a nursing home at that point. And Sheila said, no, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. Give me 6 months. And 6 months, they found a wonderful place for her to live down in Houston. And I got my one and only time at first class on an airplane with my mother. And my best friend, who was a doctor, she came along. We paid for her ticket. And we got my mom settled. I remember in the ambulette, going from the airport to 7 Acres, which was the name of this project, the place that she was going to be living. She's looking out the window going, we're in Florida? And I'm going, no, Mom, it's Houston. She says, but palm trees. I said, yeah, they got palm trees in Houston, too. I don't think she ever really accepted the fact that she was in Texas. Anything else that I can do? Sure, just, yeah, I'm sorry, absolutely.
Is Rifka in the story your mom?
Yes, Rifka's my mom. It was fun having her as a mom, let me tell you. The things she used to do. She didn't learn how to drive until she was 65, because she never really had to. We lived in places that had trains and subways and buses. And then finally, we're living out in North Valley Stream, and my dad was not well, and she said, all right, I'm going to learn how to drive, because she no longer could get to the supermarket by herself. So she bought a car under my name and my insurance and started taking lessons, okay? She flunked her driving test 3 times. And she would go out, no license, no person, 6 o'clock in the morning, as soon as it was daylight, and practice driving around our neighborhood. She'd line up garbage cans to practice doing parallel parking. And finally, she passed with flying colors. Now, mind you, I sat there going, I'm going to go to jail. You know, it's like, you know, she's got my name on this, I am going to go to jail. Didn't happen, but that was the kind of thing my mom did. Or we were traveling in Europe, she and and she always used to wear a scarf tied like a triangle, what you call a babushka, because her hair was thin. And she wore sensible shoes and carried an umbrella and a raincoat. She looked like a native, you know. So we would travel around. We were in the Low Countries, and we were in Switzerland, and we were in Vienna. And people kept coming up to Mom and going, "Sister, will you bless us?" Because she looked like a nun, you know, a non-uniformed nun. And Mom would always say, "Oh, I'm not a nun. I'm not a sister. I'm so sorry." And after a while, my mom would go, and that would be the end of it. She was amazing. So whether she was Rifka or Lucy or Susia, she was a very cool lady. You can ask Stephen. He was her bet.
I'm her grandson.
You know, and that was, so she was Nana, and that's why I'm Nana to my grandson, who's running around the children's department at this moment. Okay, I think we probably have to get out.
Last quick question.
From you?
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry. There, okay. I can't see, you'll have to forgive me. Go ahead.
Why tell these stories? What does it mean to you?
Oh, Dana. That's my daughter-in-law. Okay, what makes, it brings her alive back to me. It helps set the record straight, you know, in this. I hope to encourage other people to do the same thing. There are so many good stories out there. How many people here had family who came via Ellis Island? Or, yeah, you know, like almost everybody.
Where are the stories written down in your family?
No, see, you got to sit down. Now it's even easier. You just sit in front of the computer with the microphone. Talk. People will appreciate it. They really will. Okay, I think we are done. Yes? All right. You're very welcome. Okay. All right, so we have to clean up.
What was the spell?
Everybody was quiet. That's magic. That's usually a little boy asks me that at the end. And he goes, okay.